A massive US naval fleet looms on the horizon. On the other side, an alliance of European...
Sorry, I have to pause it already. You know what's crazy? If America tries to invade Europe, what's the first country that they encounter? Portugal. Look at that, so small. But I still have some hope for this blue thing. Please do something.
Short notice, there would be fewer jets available. In reality, even fewer than 600 for the
What the hell is this difference, my friends?
US and 50-ish for the EU, due to maintenance requirements for the carriers.
Oh, my friends, I'm having a reality check moment right now. Oh boy, what would a war between the US and Europe look like? My friends, this is a crazy title, and let me say this right away. I know America loves Europe and Europe loves America, and war, never good. That said, I'm kind of curious to see the result. Before I go into that, let me ask you for one thing. If you can leave a like, thank you so much. Is the best way to show support. Now, if you can subscribe, well, in that case, forget about it. You make my day. Have that in consideration. Link for the original video in my description, and let's play it.
A massive US naval fleet looms on the horizon. On the other side, an alliance of European...
Sorry, I have to pause it already. You know what's crazy? If America tries to invade Europe, what's the first country that they encounter? Portugal. Look at that, so small.
Union ships awaits, ready to deny the Americans the Eastern Atlantic. Soon thereafter, a massive battle ensues, with a dozen carriers, dozens of submarines and countless planes fighting it out. That's what could happen if the US and the European Union suddenly went to war with each other.
You know what? A lot of Americans right now are like, a lot of Americans, a lot of you, because all of you guys that watch me are Americans. Oh, this will not be competitive. And maybe you are right. But I still have some hope for this blue thing. Please do something.
The two superpowers total almost 800 million souls together. The great...
Wait a second. We have more people. Okay, first point.
expanse of the Atlantic Ocean is between them. So how would such a war be waged? And which side could take away their opponent's territories?
Interesting. I don't know, my friend. This will be close, maybe. Maybe.
If people learned from history, maybe there would be fewer wars. Now let us continue our scenario, the first of a two-part video series. The two sides are divided by the Atlantic, which
Oh my god, I told you, my friends, it's Lisbon, the first fish.
is pretty big, which means reacting far away from one's home bases isn't very easy. The EU could not realistically protect its faraway overseas assets, such as some Caribbean islands, French Guiana, various Pacific and Indian Ocean islands, and so on. Oh, and to make it clear, the rules of this scenario are no other countries can participate in any way, no nukes are used, and starting morale is the same for all.
So UK does not help us. Damn it, Brexit.
If hostilities started in just a few hours with no warning, US bases across Europe would be trapped. For now, the scenario will assume that wouldn't happen, and a pullout of forces before the war would be possible. More about the other option in the second video. If the EU wanted to hurt the US on US territory, it would first have to sail there. Reaching the Western Atlantic would be theoretically doable, but hard, as it would mean meeting the might of the US Navy. Surviving to reach the US assets elsewhere, like in the Pacific, would be all but impossible. The
That
EU
makes no
doesn't
sense.
even have the network of sufficient support bases and underway replenishment ships needed for such massive operations to support dozens of ships months at a time.
Okay. Okay. This is not an option. Okay, my friends. You are in this case today. You guys are not my friends, but you guys know I love you, right? But any European watching? Okay, I'm not doing well. Maybe a different plan.
In practice, the European naval fleet would likely be sunk halfway to the US in the Atlantic if it tried to reach it. As soon as it moved out of the protection of land-based aircraft, US air supremacy would take its toll. Spanish and Italian carriers have much more capacity than they have carrier-compatible jets. The Spanish ship or one of the Italian ones might not thus carry planes. Facing such paltry fighter numbers, the US fleet would reign victorious with its numerous aircraft carriers. The US Navy and Marine Corps do have more than enough planes to fill out all of the 20 carriers 2 times over. But on
Okay, so this is basic. We cannot invade. We have to wait. In this, you know what I mean? We have to wait. You guys come at us. We wait. that new plan.
short notice, there would be fewer jets available. In reality, even fewer than 600 for the
What the hell is this difference, my friends?
US and 50ish for the EU, due to maintenance requirements for the carriers. With all its reserve and training planes, the US inventory is much bigger, and US land-based aircraft
Oh, my friends, I'm having a reality check moment right now. You know what? This will be okay if there was a zero right there. Okay, they have more, but we have 700. We have 71.
would enter the fray as well, as the EU fleet approaches. So it's pretty evident it's the EU that would be on defense here, with its fleet hugging its coasts and being protected by its land-based aircraft. Another reason why the European fleet would most likely operate defensively is that its ships were primarily designed for such roles. US ships are on the
Holy sweet potato, that's a beautiful one. Oh, wow.
average quite a bit larger
That's out of Star Wars if Star Wars was in the ocean.
than the EU ones. Small ships of under 2,000 tons, as well as fast attack missile boats, which Europe also uses, would struggle to even operate in the Atlantic properly. But the same small attack boats and corvettes could be still lethal in certain circumstances when defending a coast or an archipelago.
Okay.
Which brings us to the more important issue than comparing pure numbers. Just what territories would the EU defend? As said, the Caribbean and other farther away lands would be indefensible. But there are some territories closer to Europe that the EU would likely draw a line at. Near
what?
North Africa, there are the Spanish-owned and thus EU-owned Canary Islands. A little bit to the north are the Portuguese Madeira Islands.
Yeah, Cristiano Ronaldo is actually from this island.
All those are quite a bit away
Fun fact.
from the European mainland, so protecting those would not be easy. But perhaps even more vulnerable would be the Portuguese-owned Azores, with the westernmost islands of the archipelago being over 1,000 miles away.
I believe there is a US Navy there, by the way.
The Azores would be perfect
Great. Okay, sorry. Okay, my friend, but I'm enjoying this video. Leave a like if you are having fun.
islands of the archipelago being over 1,000 miles away. The Azores would be perfect basis for further US conquests. There are other areas that might get threatened as well, but let's stick to all these islands for now. Spain and Portugal have infrastructure for a token force on each archipelago, roughly a brigade worth of troops, a SAM battery and a small detachment of jet fighters.
Okay, not bad, right? 200 fighter jets, 20, okay.
Ports could also help supply a certain smaller number of ships. Commercial airports could house a few hundred jets if need be. Repurposing airports and militarizing the islands would take months, but the US too would need months to gather its Pacific and Atlantic fleets into one massive naval force. Then again, putting too many eggs in one basket in the middle of the Atlantic might not be too prudent for the EU. In a way, cramming too many jets onto those island bases might be dangerous for Europe, as losses on the ground might be bigger than, or too many planes might simply be trapped, unable to take off. The US could also count on a sizable number of US Air Force jets, especially over the Azores, helped by its massive aerial tanker fleet. US mainland-based fighter jet receiving fuel 3 or so times could perform strike missions over that archipelago. Of course, when most of the 12-hour mission is transit time, the sortie rate and availability rate
Damn, don't destroy Azores, that's a Portuguese island, my friend.
might be halved. But that wouldn't be an issue for the US Air Force so much, as it has plenty of spare planes compared to the European Air Force.
Jesus, the amount of planes. 220 F-35. I don't even know the difference between F-35A, B and C. F-22, F-16s, A-10 are talk. Oh, we are done.
EU's forces are smaller than the complete US list shown, but as said in local terms over the Azores, they
Sorry. Oh, mesmo still crazy. Okay, but
We might still outnumber the Americans. But unlike the US fleet, where pretty much all jets except A-10s have decent air-to-air capabilities, the
what the hell is this jet Eurofighter? Can this compete with the F-35, my friends?
European fleets have plenty of single-role strike planes without meaningful air-to-air capabilities. Obsolescent MiG-21 and F-5s aren't mentioned, but even Harriers, MiG-29s and older Mirage 2000 would be quite lacking in capabilities. The EU does have decent aerial tanker assets, so keeping some planes based in Spain, for example, but having them patrol over the Azores would not be impossible. The problem would be, however, that if one wants to upkeep a patrol 24/7 from afar, that would be terribly inefficient. Basically, the EU would be spending almost its entire fighter force that way, with no guarantee of a successful defense in the long term, as its numbers would still be behind the US in the Atlantic. It is very likely the EU would thus not choose to defend the Azores and the Canaries at all cost. A quick digression. When it comes to the defense industry, the US is quite self-reliant. The EU less so. In shipbuilding, the EU mostly uses its own sourced
Can we get a win, my friends? What the hell is this? It's just America wins. What about us?
The EU
Give me a
less
small
so.
hope.
In shipbuilding, the EU mostly uses its own sourced components. The same goes for ground vehicles. But when it comes to aircraft, there would be some issues for some producers. Gripen production would be greatly hampered until some US sourced components could be replaced.
Great.
A lot of existing systems in EU armies are US made as well, so maintaining them in the long run might be an issue. This
Wait, but what about maybe America also have this problem? Some components are EU made. Nice joke, André. Okay.
goes for plentiful F-16s, F-18s, Black Hawk helicopters and such. Getting replacement precision bombs might take longer, as many of the current ones are US sourced. So crash course integration of French designed weapons might be needed. Anyway, the battles would be fought under the sea surface as well. The US has a huge fleet of submarines.
You know what? I feel like here we may be okay, because I believe Europe have good submarines.
They are
Let's
all
see it.
nuclear fueled, which means they are fast, they have unlimited endurance and they
Okay.
are quiet.
Sure.
A third of the fleet is pretty modern too,
they are amazing.
with subs made in the last quarter century. The
Oh,
Ohios
wow.
would likely be held back from the front lines due to their more strategic nature. The EU submarine fleet is smaller and not designed for fast offensive warfare. Only France has nuclear subs. The rest of
I want to close the video, my friends. I don't want to continue with this. At this point,
the fleet is a hodgepodge of various types. Old German Type 207s and 209s, but also new Type 214s. Indigenous Dutch and French-made older subs, but also modern Swedish ones. And even one Russian Kilo-class sub. So the EU would most likely send only a token force of its submarines near the Azores. They would strike only when they see a clear opportunity, which would be seldom. Waiting in ambush near EU territories, on the other hand, they could leverage their design strengths and minimize their weaknesses, and be just as quiet as the US subs on average, though the overall technological edge might still be somewhat on the US side. Actual US numbers of aerial anti-submarine platforms operating near actual EU
okay, we have 185 helicopters, various helicopters, a lot of different models. 29 Atlantic and Orion planes. I have no idea. 500 Seawalk helicopters. Poseidon planes. Oh, 37 versus...
countries would be
What the hell am I reacting?
quite a bit less than shown though. That being said, with no easy way to assure aerial supremacy, the EU would find it hard to suppress American anti-submarine assets. So the underwater fight would likely be dictated a bit more by the US than the EU forces. The US Navy would not likely see large losses as long as it keeps away from EU islands. But in taking the Azores, the Canaries and so on, the US would have to place its amphibious ships very close, which means also placing protective ships close as well. Suddenly, instead of having to search a huge part of the ocean to find targets, the EU would more or less know where the US ships are. As said, the EU would have to split their forces to defend other territories as well. The US would almost certainly go for Greenland as well. The US already has some bases on Greenland, and both Denmark and US upkeep a few hundred military personnel on the island. Greenland is pretty barren though, with very limited infrastructure, so actually operating many ships or aircraft from there would first require months of construction.
Okay.
The climate in the coastal regions of Greenland is cold but decent enough. Those regions
Oh, really? I thought it was really crazy cold.
are often
Everywhere.
without snow cover, and temperatures are bearable during most of the year. Given the proximity to the US and the lack of the EU force projection, it is very unlikely the EU would try hard to defend Greenland.
Give it
Since
up.
there would be plenty of areas that might get attacked by the US, the EU would likely consolidate its forces on defending just the key areas, the EU mainland and one overseas country, Ireland. It has to be pointed out that the whole scenario of this video very much depends on a single postulate, that the EU acts unified. Right now, each country has its own foreign policy and own defense policy.
Yeah, that's a problem actually. But let's assume we work together. I mean, otherwise this video would make no sense.
Without a unified front in those areas, the EU would be visibly weaker. Also, while the US military trains in unison, various EU countries don't have as much experience in training together or cooperation.
But damn, that's so true that they, now being a bit more honest, my friends, and all jokes aside, maybe the European Union needs a special force that, because, soldiers from Italy, probably have a different vision, a different train from soldiers from, Holland or France. It's actually a great point. I never thought about this.
Ireland, unlike the Azores and Canaries, is more defensible. It has ample infrastructure. It's much closer
quite
to
bigger.
bases in France, providing layered defenses. The Faroe Islands would also likely be protected at all costs. Similar to Greenland, they are an autonomous Danish region, but closer to the EU. Still, given their isolated nature, they might eventually fall to the US if America tries hard enough. Going after Ireland would be very hard. The distance from the mainland US is considerable. After a few months, newly constructed US bases on Greenland would help to an extent. But bases on the occupied Azores and Canaries would be key. It is very likely that the US Air Force
Okay, so that's why they wanted those three islands so much, right?
would have a few hundred planes stationed less than 1,500 miles from Ireland, with several hundred more occasionally operating from the mainland US with the help of aerial tankers, and a few hundred more of carrier-based planes. Months would pass as the US establishes control over the Atlantic, and many ships would need maintenance, so for further ops near Ireland, fresh ships would be needed, which means only a part of the US carrier fleet would ever be in battle theater at any one time. The US has pretty big airborne and amphibious assault forces,
Of course
but
they
whether
have.
they are big enough to help take Ireland, especially after some prior losses on the Atlantic Islands, is another matter. Everything described up to this point would take time, months easily,
Okay.
over half a year likely. Air attacks on Ireland would increase gradually before an assault attempt, so the EU would really have half a year to turn Ireland into a self-sufficient fortress. The Republic of Ireland has some 5 million residents. It is also consistently near the top of the most self-sufficient countries when it comes to food. Adding 500,000 or more EU troops to Ireland and supporting them would likely not be much of an issue, especially since the US would be unable to completely close off the influx of goods to Ireland. But definitely that supply corridor from France to Ireland would be under near constant naval and air attacks. If the US tried to keep the corridor fully closed, it would have to actually park a huge chunk of its navy there, and that would mean whatever ships are there would be constantly exposed to EU attacks. It would be an unwise move that would cause the US
You know what? I feel like we are doing a bit better right now because again, invading is really difficult.
unsustainable and inexcusable losses. Before the landing, the edge and cruise missiles would definitely come handy to the US.
Oh boy.
The EU has far fewer, and it's likely it would save up most of them for sporadic harassment of
Oh. Okay.
would cause the US unsustainable and inexcusable losses.
We are doing a bit better here.
Before the landing, the edge and cruise missiles would definitely come handy to the US.
And we
the
are not
EU
again.
has far fewer, and it's likely it would save up
man.
most of them for sporadic harassment of US bases on
Okay, let's see it. US cruise missiles 7.6. You know what, my friends? At this point, the only way for Europe to win is we have to call the Avengers. Oh wait, those are Americans. Oh,
the Azores and the Canaries. It has to be said that the cruise
we
missiles
are
would
done.
not be used by either side in doomsday salvos. Neither side could actually have enough launching platforms in range to unleash 1,000 missiles at once. And the number of targets in the EU is staggering, which would likely mean the US too would use its missiles on select targets.
20 B-2 bombers, 61 B-1B, 51 B-52. Oh my.
Like the island bases, Spanish, Portuguese and French ports, select air bases and of course the Republic of Ireland as a whole, certainly hindering both the EU's resupply efforts over the sea and the EU's presence in the air. But more about the end war and the invasion of Ireland in the second part of our video series.
Wait, Oh wait, this is part 1 of 2. My friends, should I watch the part 2? Leave a like if you We are going to watch that right away, right? No chance I make another video. Give me a second. My friends, you really have to leave me a like because I could split this in 2 videos, but I'm just going all in for you, my friends. Let's finish this, part 2. I was about to say, if we end up missing part 1, but there is no way of missing part 1. But I'm gonna do a recap either way. America is winning. Europe, it's still alive.
The final part of our video series on a
Hey, my friends, but let me say one thing. I know war is a really bad thing. I mean, at the end of the day, we all should want peace, and America and Europe, at the end of the day, are two, I would say, two amazing continents, even though America is a country, but it's so big that, you know, you guys get the point. And this is just for fun. Don't. Some people sometimes get mad at this, but at the end of the day, I think this is for fun, right, my friends? Hypothetical. That's a nice word in English.
hypothetical war between the EU.
Okay, hypothetical war. Okay. Let's put from the start.
Welcome to the final part of our video series on a hypothetical war between the EU and the US.
Okay,
Do
we
check
are
out
alive.
part 1, which ends with the US taking Greenland and the European
Wait, that was a fact already that the Greenland was gone?
islands in the Atlantic. Finally, the might of the US military was poised to pounce on Ireland. The US landing fleet going after Ireland would certainly be big. The US could hope to land up to 30,000 troops on the first day, depending on the equipment they would carry along. Further waves might take days though, due to extreme distances. But the US Navy does have an option for a
Okay, but protecting Ireland is crucial. We know that at this point.
shortcut.
Let's go, my friends. Hey, leave a like again.
Getting back to our video, part of the mentioned landing fleet could try shorter turnarounds using the transfer dock ships. Those would enable transfer of vehicles between large ro-ro ships to the assault ships. Transfer dock ships would help to an extent. Still, those are very vulnerable on their own, so they too would likely be kept hundreds of miles away, and the Atlantic Ocean might make transfer between ships very problematic. Actually taking and holding a functioning port in Ireland would be next to impossible so early in the landing
Okay.
operation, so loading various ro-ro cargo ships directly in ports would not happen. Airborne assaults would help too, but those troops are even more lightly equipped than the Marines. It is unlikely that the US would be able to land and keep landing enough troops anywhere on Ireland to withstand the EU's counterattack. Complete surprise would be unlikely for the US, even if the
Okay, my friend. This may be the start of a comeback, actually.
Most of the EU's airborne recon units would be neutralized by the US beforehand. Ireland does have several hills positioned nicely to aid in visual spotting if all else fails. Line of sight range from those is some 60 miles. The Republic of Ireland is also quite compact. To centrally positioned response forces, most of Ireland would only be 100 or so miles away. If the EU would house some 350,000 ground troops in Ireland, that could, for example, mean two response forces of 100,000 each and 150,000 more dispersed in various locations along the coast. Most likely a disproportionately large force would be housed in the County Donegal, up north. The US
You know what, my friends, but being real, this shows how difficult it is actually to invade a country. We see between Russia and Ukraine right now, right? Russia is quite more strong, I think it's fair to say, but they struggle because it's difficult to invade. And I think we are seeing, in a different level, of course, a bit of that in this video.
might very well try to land somewhere close in an attempt to use the very narrow battlefield near the border with the UK's Northern Ireland so it secures a large part of land for further landings. Could the EU afford to house so many troops in Ireland alone? If it doesn't go all in on the defenses of the Atlantic Islands, most probably yes. While air forces and navies aren't the EU's strongest suits, land forces are. Its 27 countries have a combined ground army that rivals the US. The US likely trains more though, and in a more realistic way than some of the poorer EU countries' militaries. The EU reserve forces are...
The thing is, and again, now I'm being a bit more honest on this second part, the US soldier is probably the best in the world, right, in terms of training.
Are a few times bigger than the US reserve component. But the US National Guard trains and gets deployed in war zones more than any other reservist unit. Many EU countries have systems where most people simply never train. The US Army Reserve, on the other hand, is made up of support units. Basically, they are there to facilitate large-scale wars when additional logistics and support are needed, unlike the EU's reserves, which do have lots of combat units. But none of those big numbers would matter for the US. As said, the US would not be able to move those numbers to the battlefield, so its forces in Ireland would likely always be 5 to 10 times smaller than the EU figures.
Okay, you know what? If you guys ever played Risk, a game, you can play it online, but even tabletop, this remembers me that.
Once the Atlantic
We are all in on Ireland at this point.
Islands are lost, the EU would not have many other areas under threat. The US could try to land in Portugal or Spain for
Okay, the moment. Okay. Let me be prepared for this.
the EU figures. Once the Atlantic Islands are lost, the EU would not have many other areas under threat. The US could try to land in Portugal or Spain, for example,
no.
but its long-term prospects there would be worse than in Ireland. The EU could more easily focus and amass its forces, not cut off by the sea. Even though during the initial few days, the US might fare better than in Ireland.
Oh, no, it's too close. Go away. What?
As the EU would need time to focus its reaction force on a larger battlefield.
And Portugal is gone. Damn it.
And it's not just the overall numbers or training that would be the issue for the US. The landed Marines or airborne troops would have light equipment with them, not many artillery pieces, not many tanks. The EU, however, might rush to those shores with tenfold more heavy equipment. It has to...
Okay, now we are seeing. Okay, my friends, you guys thought this was done. Look at the amount of tanks. Oh, this is a big difference. Okay, this is looking much better now.
To be said that the fair share of EU equipment is somewhat old, so direct comparison is hard. That goes not just for tanks, but other vehicles and artillery. Helicopters would also be massively used by the EU for added firepower. Not requiring
Look at the name, Tiger.
runways, they would be harder to neutralize on the ground. And US air...
Is this a good helicopter for real? Because I know the Americans are not.
Not requiring runways, they would be harder to neutralize on the ground. And US air defenses over the coastline would likely be suppressed. US fighter cover would be sporadic due to the extreme distances involved. So the numbers shown are a nominal tally only. In reality, the US would be hard-pressed to operate more than 100-ish Cobra helicopters from US
Damn. Okay.
Navy ships, with precious ship deck space better used for ferrying goods and troops to the beachhead. Drones might even be available in greater numbers to the US than attack helicopters due to their ranges. But in combat missions over such well-defended areas, they would fare poorly as they are not equipped to deal with air defenses. Attack helicopters would endanger vehicles on shore or approaching the Irish coastline. A Hellfire-class missile would be dangerous even to various landing craft. ATGMs could threaten pretty much any vehicle, and by their nature they're quite hard to find when operated by a small soldier squad. The EU likely has scores of such missiles. Counting just the self-propelled launch platforms, the missile threat to unloaded US vehicles would be quite grave. The list does not include infantry fighting vehicles which can also carry ATGMs, like Spike missiles. Coastal anti-ship batteries and other helicopters carrying anti-ship missiles would likely keep making appearances. The EU would try to maintain a supply line to Ireland via commercial ships, sailing from France and possibly Denmark to ports in the Irish Sea. EU transport helicopters and cargo planes would also fly regularly, bringing in fresh supplies and troops. As the US would not have air control over Ireland, those would only occasionally be shot down, but more often than not, they would get through, especially when flying low. As mentioned, a fleet can't be out to sea indefinitely. For a half-a-year period or longer, the US would at best be able to upkeep 30% of its fleet on station, so far away from its mainland, with the remaining ships either undergoing maintenance or being in transit. The EU's fleet would also require maintenance, but it would not have to be deployed all the time, so it could afford to amass huge attack waves once every several weeks or so.
Again, it's the same problem. Invading is really difficult.
Which means less time spent in maintenance
Defending
for ships.
Much easier.
And with less transit time, overall availability of the EU fleet might be double the US figure. Continuous air cover for the US fleet would also be quite problematic. It's one thing to perform attack waves long way from home, like on the big known targets in the Azores or in Ireland. The US would choose the time of the attack, amass a force, and send it once per day or so. The actual time those planes would spend over the battlefield would likely be less than an hour per day. When trying to use planes for protection, denying the EU their fighter strikes, the US would have to have its own fighter interceptors handy 24/7. Even carrier-borne planes may not be able to afford being put on the deck and waiting to take off for interceptions.
You know what's crazy, my friends, for real? I actually have no idea how this will end at this point. This guy did a tremendous job because, it's evident that America is quite more powerful. That's obvious, basically, since the minute 2 or 3. But I don't know, again, invading? Wow, how difficult is this?
To protect those landing ships and those ships trying to block the route to Ireland, the carriers would not be able to stay hundreds of miles away if they are to react in a timely fashion. So they would either have to be very close and thus risk getting attacked, or they would have to keep planes in the air over the battlefield area 24/7. If they do that, it means for every plane in the area on patrol, a few more planes would be unavailable while on rotation. And the ratio of unavailable planes would skyrocket if the US tried to do the same with ground-based planes from the conquered Azores or Greenland bases. Given the finite land area in the Azores and basically non-existent Greenland infrastructure, the US would not be able to house 1,200 fighters in said areas just to be able to have 200 fighters on constant air patrol near France. Adding a few hundred more carrier-borne planes would help, but that force would still be very hard-pressed to fight potentially much bigger attack waves from the EU air forces. For the air campaign, and especially for upkeep of a patrol over a battlefield area, situational awareness would be crucial, and the EU might have an edge there. The US would be limited to its aircraft projecting power from afar. Being on home turf, the EU would have both aerial radar platforms and numerous ground-based radars, as well as some ship-based ones in certain situations where those high-in-demand ships aren't needed elsewhere. Given that the US would need several aircraft for only one to be on rotation, and given that the carriers and other areas would need to be defended, the US would likely not have more than a dozen AWACS-type planes around Ireland at any given time.
You know what, unless something crazy happens, I think this will be a draw. Basically, Europe, no chance can invade America. And I'm starting to believe that America will also struggle. No, is in Portuguese, no. What I meant is, of course I know America will struggle, but I thought after the struggle, maybe there was something, and I don't think it is.
Shipborne air defenses would very much come into play, but most of those would be intercepting missiles, attacking ships, not being able to reach actual planes launching the missiles. The US Navy is, however, very much designed around an air defense destroyer fleet. Literally all but 2 of their capital ships have long-range air defenses. The best weapon the US fleet would have there is by far the triad of its airborne radar sensors, the Aegis-equipped ships, and the SM-6 long-range air defense missile. The missile's reach is considerable, though against fast tactical targets it's likely to be at the lower end of the shown range. The upper range figure advertised is likely against ground or sea targets. The good thing about it is that, unlike the SM-2 missiles, it can partially engage targets on its own, without the constant need for Aegis's radars, meaning planes flying under the ship's radar horizon could also be engaged. The issue for the US, though, would be the missile's availability. The figure shown may seem high enough, but ships can't reload those missiles at sea. They have to return to a port, which means that in practice, the US would have roughly half the shown number in the battle theater at any one time. With various decoys, jamming, and the fact that SAMs are never even near 100% effective, it's quite likely the actual number of planes downed by said missiles would be 100 or 200 airframes. The air and sea battle near the beachhead would be that of unimaginable chaos. Dozens of ships destroyed on both sides. The EU
Oh boy, the war is entering a new phase. I feel like this is getting crazy.
Launching anti-ship missiles from the coast, submarines, fast attack craft, and low-flying aircraft. The US would have some advantage in stealth planes, but not much, as most of those are ground-based planes, which would be hard-pressed to be on patrol often. Neither side would really be able to amass enough planes to wipe out the other side's fighters in decisive battles. Most of the time, the US would lack numbers in stealth planes, and when the US would amass enough, the EU would avoid the confrontation. Likewise, when the EU would amass their fleets, the US would avoid direct battles as well. Getting back to the naval fleet's air defenses, the EU's are visibly worse, so they would likely keep their fleet back and use hit-and-run tactics. Perhaps more important in the whole war would be the EU land-based air defenses, which are quite varied. Again, a hodgepodge of old Cold War SAMs of almost no usefulness and modern capable systems. The EU would likely not risk many of those on defenses of the Azores and Canaries and save them for the defense of Ireland and Europe proper. 24 modern long-range batteries and 36 medium-range systems in Ireland would create quite a dense network. Ultimately, it would all mean that the US air support to its troops on the beachhead would be very sporadic and quantitatively well below what the US is used to and what its doctrine is designed around. Those troops would sooner or later get surrounded and suffocated, forced to surrender after heavy losses. At the very best, if the US manages to greatly surprise the EU, and if the EU reacts slowly and incoherently, the US might be able to keep part of Ireland occupied and supplied, such as the Donegal region, as it's very easy to defend once it's all under
Oh, that became blue, my friends. This is... if you ever played a video game, you know, you lost this one.
US control. Still, even that would likely call for the sacrifice of over 1,000 combat planes and dozens of US capital combat ships, submarines, and some carriers. The US would be spent by then, and the small and nearby Donegal region would be under constant barrage, unable to house further aircraft. It's possible the front might stagnate, becoming unmovable for months and months. The US would lack ships to go on and support further landings or supply a huge push outside Donegal. the EU would lack both the ships and aircraft to sever the US supply line. And even a multi-fold advantage in numbers and heavy firepower for the EU would not be effective in such a tiny space, as only a finite, tiny number of troops could fit there. The one area where the US might experience some big additional losses is if the scenario does assume absolutely zero preparation for war. In that case, the many US bases in EU countries would find themselves quickly isolated and surrounded, with no real chance to defend themselves. Most likely,
Of course, this makes no sense since Europe and America are, countries that will always be together, I feel like. But this would be crazy.
the entire contingent of US personnel across the continent would get captured,
You guys saw 30,000 in Germany.
with the hardware either destroyed in fighting or by the US personnel. Forces in nearby countries might also get blockaded or cut off though, as the rules of the scenario don't allow third-party interference. So those US bases in the UK could not be attacked nor used for an attack. But the US forces in Turkey though might be able to relocate safely. Still, that might mean the US would have some of its forward units' equipment unable to participate in the conflict. Anyway, a truce would be signed once it becomes obvious no side can achieve any further gains. The US would have lost a lot in terms of men and equipment. Losing perhaps half of its naval and air forces would be an immense cost, but at the same time, the EU would lose probably even more percentage-wise. And more importantly for the US, it would be in possession of many new territories.
Okay, my
All
friends.
those overseas.
You guys won this one. No, but for real, I thought this was interesting, my friends. I mean, I knew from the start that America was quite more stronger. But I think this video is good to show to people how difficult it is to invade, because even a country like America that is so strong, right, my friends, will face adversity here. Of course, I know when we start to go atomic bombs, the nuclear route, things are completely insane. I have no idea what will happen, and I feel like no one knows what will happen. But in a normal, if we can say that, water, this was, America was stronger, but I thought it was nice to see.
Islands and regions would be added to the US, forward bases in the Eastern Atlantic, control of the North Pole via Greenland, and possibly even that little piece of Ireland, an eternal thorn in the eye for the Europeans.
It's a win.
Of course, if the EU greatly hesitates in uniting, then even the entire Republic of Ireland might be lost.
Okay, my friends, actually I have a question for you. This channel have, I believe, 2 videos that I would not mind watching. One is the US versus UK. I think that one is quite more easy for America than Europe, for logic reasons. But since this was so difficult, I kind of want to watch that one. And now I'm super curious to see if America could invade Russia, because this guy did such a tremendous job. You know what? This is for the ones that watch until the end. Leave me the number 7 in the comment section if I should take a look at those 2 videos, because this was fun. Would you guys agree? I had it was stressful, but I had a great time. Friends, thank you so much for watching. Do not forget to leave a like. See you guys in the next one. Bye, my friends.